Hello, Eco 2000 students. Dr. Conway here for Lesson 7 on monetizing benefits and costs in environmental economics. You will recall the purpose for this discussion and this element of environmental economics is that when we're doing studies of environmental economics, whether those be cost-benefit analysis studies or any kind of an economic analysis, for environmental economics. One of the major liabilities of the field is that a lot of things that are important to the environment and ecosystems are not monetized, right? They don't have a pre-existing market price. And anything that's not counted won't be considered in most economic decision making. And so environmental economists have spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how to develop monetization techniques for environmental capital that does not have a market price. Whether that be trees in the forest, rivers running through ecotourism areas, the value of birds, the value of other forms of endangered species, any number of other factors that will be important for environmental decision making. That won't be considered very well if they don't have a monetary value. We know, for example, that cost-benefit analysis seeks monetization of both costs and benefits, right? So cost-effectiveness analysis is it's less of a concern where we're monetizing costs but just quantifying benefits. And in that case, you could do an environmental study that said that if we spend this much money, we're liable to protect this much quantity of natural habitat, or protect this many endangered species, or to protect this number of animals within an endangered species, etc. All right, but when we're dealing with monetization and economic decision making, environmental economists have had to try to figure ways to monetize those valuable attributes that are not necessarily monetized in the marketplace already. All right, so on that score, let's get started. All right. There are three broad categories of techniques that have been developed for monetizing values that have not yet been monetized in the marketplace and probably never will be. Revealed preference methods, stated preference methods, and benefit transfer method. All right, so let's look at these different kinds of methods. All right. So, as I was saying, returns that are not monetized in the market require the use of surrogate indicators and for economic monetization to occur. All right, it's important to understand the difference between a surrogate indicator and a performance indicator. Right, a surrogate indicator is another factor that tries to measure something indirectly. All right, so we have a surrogate indicator for the value that people place on parks in their neighborhood. We don't have a sticker price for parks, but we can develop a surrogate indicator for assigning a value to those parks, and cities do this all the time. All right, and that's why new development communities within the city of Ottawa, for example, can't just develop housing throughout. They have to allot by bylaw a certain amount of it for park space, because the city knows that homeowners place a value on park space. And why does the city do it? Well, higher value of houses around parks means higher tax base for the city, right? And that's different from performance indicators, right? Performance indicators are those things that you try to measure because you're trying to achieve a goal, all right? So it's important to understand the difference between those things, right? So the surrogate indicator, by contrast with performance indicators, reflects a research question as its primary purpose rather than milestones towards an objective, which is what performance indicators do. For example, a surrogate indicator for returns from moving to green builds could be value assigned to old growth trees saved by not clear cutting building lots. And I'll talk to you about how we would value that. And people do value those things, all right, to make decisions on large development initiatives. Urban planning will use this quite extensively, all right. So, as I said, there are three different kinds: revealed preference method, stated preference methods, and benefit transfer method. Let's look at revealed preference methods. They're called revealed preference methods because we're looking at the way people actually behave, the money they actually expend, and so on in the marketplace to be able to post hoc assign a value to something. And I'll explain to you how you would do that. A value to an environmental attribute. All right. So they rely on existing market prices to reflect indirectly the returns in non-market attributes for a good or service. All right. For instance, analysts can use change in property prices in a locality to proxy the change in environmental quality and green spaces for children to play in safe areas. All right. And this is something that has now become common practice. That's why when you go into websites that specialize, let's say, in real estate, you'll see scores for walkability, for park space, for quality of schools nearby, and so on. They're not doing that by accident. They're doing that because that tends to manifest itself in market prices. All right. And so developers who are sophisticated and are developing major areas, like when Stittsville first started to be developed, or Riverside South first started to be developed, these factors would all be considered in terms of the attributes that people want in that neighborhood, because that will be reflected in the value that the builder can get for the house. All right. So the first is the hedonic price method. All right. The hedonic price method can be used to estimate returns for services that directly affect market prices. Okay. For instance, it is often applied to variations in housing prices that reflect the value of local or neighborhood attributes, those attributes not already having a market price. Okay. For example, it can be used to estimate the value of the returns that people assign to better schools for children, better play areas, safer streets, and so forth. All right. The underlying rationale for the hedonic pricing method is that the price of a marketed good is related to its overall characteristics, okay, or the services it provides, in addition to, they say, the lumber that went into the build or the square footage of the house. For example, why is it that two houses essentially identical but in different neighborhoods would garner different prices? All right. Why does one garner a higher price than the other? Well, then you look at the attached attributes of that house. Well, there's nice parks nearby, there's a highly rated school in the neighborhood, and so on. So people are willing to pay $50,000 more for exactly the same house. So then we can begin to ascribe that $50,000 for the difference in attributes between the highest paid house and the lower paid house. And we can value, then the builder can say, okay, with these kind of attributes, I'm able to draw $50,000 more per every unit that I build in that area. So I'm going to design these factors into these environmental attributes into the site plan. All right, the overall build out plan. Okay, and so that's the way most of it is done within real estate and within urban planning and within development planning. All right, like people will do studies of existing neighborhoods and the way people are already behaving. Remember, I told you this is post hoc set of methods, revealed preference methods. So they will look at these things and they will determine that their sweet spot in terms of a price point that they want to get is enhanced. That while I'm giving up 3 acres for a park, which could have been 11 or 12 houses, what I'm doing is recouping that value and more through using that space instead for a park, and then being able to garner more resources from each of my units subsequent to, all right, or around the park. And those calculations are always done down to very scientific approaches for these kinds of things, to place values on those factors that don't currently already have a market price. All right. The second type, that's the hedonic method. The second method under this category of revealed preference is what we call the travel cost method. And this is used extensively in development planning in developing countries, for example. But it's also used heavily in North America when people are planning malls, for example, and other major infrastructural investments. Okay, the travel cost method is used to estimate economic use values associated with services that are not monetized because they are provided by public bodies or are otherwise quote unquote free. All right. The underlying rationale for the travel cost method is that the time and travel cost expenses that people incur to visit a site, right, is that, will reveal certain preferences they have for ancillary services around that site. For example, my firm, once we did a large study in Africa because they were placing healthcare clinics in Uganda and Zambia, and one of the questions was, why is it that people are, from poor villages where it's very difficult for them to travel long distances, are driving by this healthcare clinic to go to another healthcare clinic? Why are they assuming those additional travel costs? And how can we explain that, right? So you look at the one that they're traveling to and you find out it's got shopping nearby. These people, when they travel, they have to have a multi-purpose trip because it can take them all day, literally by oxen and cart, all right? So they have very strong reasons. Plus they can get some entertainment. Plus they can, whatever's around that clinic that they're willing to pay more money to travel to, you apply that additional travel cost that they're assuming in time and inconvenience, or if they're driving in gasoline, or in risk in some countries, traveling through dangerous areas, or whatever. You assign a value to those travel costs, and then you attribute those to those additional features that clinic they're traveling extra distance to has. And then you can use that to justify building those infrastructures around the closer clinic to keep them there, all right? So you know how much money you can invest to make the first clinic more attractive, okay? And that's how travel cost method things are used. Mall developers use this technique. All kinds of facility, police stations, where you set up police stations, where a lot of this stuff, is done through travel cost method, all right? And so they, these are really important ways of assigning values to things that don't otherwise have a market price. And these are not just environmental things, right? Our topic is environment, but these can be applied to security considerations, right? To entertainment, to commercial opportunity situations, to you name it, right? I mean, why do people live in cities when it's much cheaper to live in a village 100 miles from the city, right? Well, these are all the reasons that we look at when we use the travel cost method, all right? Averting expenditures method is similar to the travel cost method. It's the averting expenditures method is used to measure the costs incurred by individuals to protect themselves from a known human health or safety risk. And this is often used in environmental studies to look at what are the cost implications when a factory sets up and drives down the value of properties around the factory because the factory has a smokestack and so on and so forth, right? So people are willing to sell their houses at less money and buy more expensive houses over there because they're worried about their children's health in terms of breathing in smog or whatever the case may be. So a lot of environmental studies look at what we call the averting expenditures method. What is it costing the community by setting up this plant? Not only what are all the benefits in terms of jobs and all that kind of stuff, but what are the costs in terms of surrounding communities, surrounding ecosystems, and what are people willing to pay to avert those risks, right? Not NIMBYism is a pejorative term for what I'm talking about here, right? Not in my backyard, because they know that if they have it in their backyard, a solid waste site or something like that's going to drive down their property values, and they're willing to pay or to mobilize to not have it there, all right? So averting expenditures methods are used often in security considerations. For example, where you place bus depots and stuff like that, right? Why are women driving by their closest stop for their neighborhood to go to a further stop that it's a longer walk, but they can walk in a more safer direction? What is that costing in terms of time and so on and so forth? So police departments will often use the averting expenditures method, okay? And other types of organizations that are involved in security considerations. All right, so what additional expenses are people paying to avert what they perceive to be a risk? And therefore you have a budget number that says that this is, if we expend this amount of money on that area where they consider to be more risky, maybe we attract them there, and it's a justified expenditure, all right, because the community is already spending that money through averting those expenditures, right, inefficiently. Okay, so, you know, and I give you a daycare example here, but you can read that on the slides, all right. Cost of illness method is a big one. Okay, this is a very common thing used in environmental and public health work. All right, you know, I did a large study for UNEP and UNDP in sub-Saharan Africa on pesticides. I might have mentioned this before, and you know that what was the cost of illness associated with unsound management of pesticides, particularly children and women and pregnant women and so on small landholding farms. How many days were lost to illness, to poisoning? How many times did kids miss school because of illness related to pesticide application? How much food stock was lost because the pesticide residues were too high? All of these factors were cost of illness. Where you look at it, you know, how much does it cost when a poor worker goes to a hospital? How much does it cost in travel? How much does it cost in paying the doctor? How much? All of these things to come up with a number that said that, you know, this is costing you $5 billion. Unsound management of chemicals is costing you $5 billion. So that's what you can put. You know, that's what your community can afford to put into improved sound management of pesticides. All right. So, you know, it looks at the, you know, there's no price, you know, specific price attached to a lot of the risk, you know, direct prices that relate to the inappropriate pesticide use. So we look at you know, what it's, you know, how people are having to spend money to account for the illness of the pesticides, and then we can say that this is what you're losing by having unsound management of pesticides, and that could be attributed to improving the overall conditions of these farmers. All right, so this is a very common thing used by World Health Organization, by health organizations all over the world. For example, we look at urban smog, right? And WHO announces that urban smog costs societies, you know, $100 billion a year, right? How do they do that? They're doing that through the cost of illness method, all right? Very powerful method. Like I say, very, very common in environmental and public health work, all right? The second broad class is stated preference methods, right? There's the revealed preference methods where what people were actually doing, and then you look at what they were actually doing and you explain it against the surrogates that you're trying to measure, right? In the stated preference method, you're asking people to make decisions. Now, environmental economists feel much less confident of stated preference methods because there's a much greater risk of error, right? Whereas revealed preference methods, you know what they actually did, you know, so you can measure it with greater accuracy. In stated preference methods, you're asking the people what they would pay for an environmental attribute or a security attribute or whatever the case may be. Okay, so it's usually done through a direct survey method, but can be done through focus groups as well. Very common in a number of different marketing areas, right? I mean, marketing uses stated preference methods and focus groups and surveys extensively, all right? And, you know, you walk into a mall and you have a young person there with a clipboard. And they say, sir or ma'am, could you answer a few questions? Boom, 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 boom. Or you have observers, right, who are just sitting on the chair. You walk in and you go, why are these people just sitting there taking notes? Because they're watching what you're doing, right? They're watching whether you're flowing through the mall or whether you're doing some other thing or you're stopping and looking confused or whatever, and they're checking this off on a board, right? And it's like they're surveying what's going on, all right? And then they may ask you some questions to compound that, right? So these are techniques that are asking individuals to state their willingness to pay that, you know, for a good or a service, all right? And like I say, many economists, are tentative about this because, you know, the chance for risk is obviously extensive when you're looking at, you're asking people to say what they might do as opposed to what they actually do. All right. So there's contingent valuation method is one of them. This type of survey asks how much money people would be willing to pay or willing to accept to maintain the existence of or could be compensated for the loss of something they place a value on, such as children's walking guards, a local park, a local a local community center, local churches. Should land be made available for that? These are all kinds of decisions that marketers will use extensively. All right, but also urban planners. Urban planners will use that extensively as well. All right. Then, building on that, each of these other ones become more refined. Contingent ranking method. This type of survey asks respondents to compare and rank alternate program outcomes with various characteristics, including their associated costs. All right, so you might be given a list of different attributes that a community should have, and they'll ask you to rank them. All right, they'll ask you to rank them, including their costs. All right, so the cost implications of that on taxes. So they might estimate that if you added, extra, fringe benefits in the neighborhood, the value of houses would go up so much, and then that becomes a cost to that consumer, right, or that homeowner. So they would rank that, and they say this might cost you an extra $25 on your tax, and this might cost you an extra, and they would estimate, and then would tell people to rank it, okay? Because then that gives you a sense as well, these people don't even think that such and such is worth 25 extra bucks on their taxes. Well, obviously that might not get programmed, and so on, all right? So that's the way you can rank order attributes that do not have a pre-existing market price, okay? Then the conjoint analysis, or choice experiment method, it's called. This type of survey originated out of commercial marketing field, all right? It is typically used to determine what features a new product or service should have and how they should be differentially priced. Valued returns while faced with trade-offs between options. So this is much like the one we just talked about, but only this one assigns the respondent a budget and says, and then looks at all of the various attributes and then assigns a portion of that budget to them. Okay, and it says now rank them. Okay, but you got to fit them within your overall budget, and then you begin to really get a feel for the trade-offs people are willing to make. Okay, so this one focuses more on the trade-offs people are willing to make, right, when you're trying to force them. So often, these two types of analyses, all right, the contingent ranking method and the conjoint analysis might be used in phases as you hone and hone and hone and hone and hone down to the features that people really want, right? This can be a very powerful tool in interior design, for example. All right, I mean, and it is used, in the design field extensively, right, and in the product development field extensively. Automobile design, will they pay more for automatic, windshield wipers? Will they pay more for the more grandiose sound system? Automobile makers don't just put this stuff in their cars without studying it extensively, right? So, I mean, these are the types of techniques that are used to study these types of things extensively, all right? Then finally, the benefit transfer method, and this is the typical method that you would be using in your design groups, right? This would be taking similar studies, okay? So, for example, say your environmental design, your green design of your commercial building was that one of the benefits that you're accruing to that is better productivity of your workers, or better worker retention, or better worker recruitment. All right, so you might not have the budget or the expertise to do those studies independently on every individual design proposal you're going to be doing, but you would look to pre-existing studies on the same subject, look at their conclusions from that, and then adjust those accordingly to your circumstances, because your circumstances of your build might not be the same as the circumstances where that study was done. But you take the findings of that study and you adjust them accordingly in terms of numbers of people or likelihood of applicability of those findings to your case. There will be an error factor there, but that is obviously the typical way that most research papers are done, right? We look at the findings of other people and we try to apply them in a rational way to our circumstance, adjusting them accordingly, okay, to the circumstances the factors of our study as opposed to the factors of the study for what you're drawing the findings, where they had more budget, more time, more expertise to generate numbers. So LEAD concludes that on average it's, whatever percentage more expensive to build green over a typical build, right? So you might use that as your estimate of a benefit, all right? A benefit in terms of worker retention, a benefit in terms of fewer sick days, a benefit in terms of like all of these factors can then, be drawn from other studies who have looked at these specific questions and then adjusted accordingly to your circumstances, right? And so typically when people review your study, when you do that, they're going to be looking for a reasonable, rational, logical adjustment of the findings of a credible study to your circumstances in terms of, say, numbers of people involved or scale of the business, or, adjusting them for, the numbers might be very high in the study you're looking at because the surrounding employers are so poor. You would have to adjust maybe to a more realistic average. Any number of factors might need to be adjusted, but it's typically how most students and many people will conduct quick studies of situations, of the implications of, say, a green build to employee retention or happiness or work productivity, fewer sick days, performance, market value of the company, any number of factors that would go into attributing benefits to a green build over a standard build, but you don't have the time and resources to do all those individual studies. So you look at people who have done the studies and then adjust them accordingly to the circumstances that you're facing in a rational and reasonable, defensible way that you put into your paper, so people can say, yeah, that seems pretty fair adjustments of the findings of a credible study. And that's called the benefit transfer method, all right? So those are techniques that we use to often assign values to those things that don't have values in predetermined market values in environmental economics, all right? On that score, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.